pulp writer, a rock musician, a world famous magician, and a scientist. Those are the four biographies that we're going to look at today. So here we go. Hi, folks. My name is Lee. I'm the retired book guy. We're going to look at four biographies today. The first one we're going to look at is Pulp Writer, 20 Years in the American Grub Street by Paul S. Powers, edited and with biographical essays by Lori Powers. So Lori is the niece of Paul S. Powers. She didn't really know him growing up, and she was an aspiring writer herself. And she was contacted by her aunt and said that there were some boxes up in her attic. She knew they belonged to her brother, Paul, and she thought that Lori would like to have them because she's an aspiring writer and he was a writer. So she went, met with her aunt, got these boxes. There were old manuscripts in there. There were lots of magazines. There was a lot of things in there about Paul. She found autobiography that Paul had written about his days as a pulp writer in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. He wrote for publications such as Wild West Weekly, Weird Tales, True Detective. These were the pulps of that era. They were, dime magazines that you could buy in department stores or dime stores, drug stores and newsstands. They were everywhere. They were printed on very cheap paper. That's why they were called the pulps, pulp magazines. They're still called that today. It's kind of a bygone era now, but Paul was a very prolific writer in that era. And Lori knew this, and so she took the autobiography and she read about her grandfather that she barely knew growing up. She knew he was kind of estranged from the family. She heard that he had a bit of an alcohol problem, but she knew he was a writer and wrote for these pulp magazines. She read the autobiography, thought it was very interesting. He was a very interesting character. She decided to publish his autobiography and add some biographical essays. The first couple chapters are her doing some research into him, what she was able to find out. She wrote about the pulp magazine era. It was kind of a golden age of magazines in that time period. And this is just a very good read. If you're into the pulps from back then, I know coming up here in a couple weeks, I believe it's July 29th, it starts. Pulp Fest is held here in Pittsburgh, and I'm going to go to that this year. I went once, I think about 5 years ago. I am going to go this year. Maybe I'll see some of you there. I know some of you are really into that. Not only do they have pulp magazines there, but they have uh, novels from that era too. With the really neat covers from the 40s, 50s, 60s. It's just kind of a celebration of that era. So I'm going to be going to that, and I'm sure I'll probably see some fiction there by Paul Powers. So anyway, if you are into that era, or even if you're not, if you want to learn about that era, and this is a very interesting book. He's an interesting character. He moved out west. That's the thing about pulp writers. They got paid by the word. So he wrote hundreds and hundreds of stories for publications, short stories, novellas for these publications. And his craft was just honed so well that the writing is actually very, very good. But anyway, I kind of digress. If you want to read a good biography of a writer back in that era, I highly suggest it. It's not a very long book. This came out in 2007. It's got 274 pages. So it's not a very long biography, but I highly suggest it. It's Pulp Writer by Paul S. Powers. The second book on my list, and this definitely is a personal favorite, it's My Effin' Life by Geddy Lee. And Geddy Lee is the bass player and frontman for the band Rush, which just happens to be my favorite band also. Um, I've liked them since the 80s, since I was a teenager in the 1980s. Um, but this book came out in 2023. It's a really beautiful book, actually. It's got some really neat illustrations inside. Inside the book cover, there's some pictures of some Rush tickets and Rush memorabilia. And then there's some really good pictures inside the book, just showing their lives, all of their lives. Um, uh, Even pictures of concert promotions, um, just all kind of all kind of pictures, loaded with pictures, and the writing is very good also. Um, so very interesting life that Geddy Lee had. Uh, well, his parents, in a couple chapters in here, are devoted to this. They were in concentration camps in World War II in Poland. And in fact, that's where they met. They met in the concentration camps. And they ended up getting separated while there. And, you know, tragically, they lost loved ones uh, in those camps. But they were able to persevere and they made it through and they found each other after the war and got married, ended up emigrating to Canada, to Toronto, and they opened a department store together and managed a department store. They raised a family, and Geddy Geddy was born Gary Lee Weinreb. Actually, I think his name was Gershon Lee Weinreb, and I guess that's Yiddish for Gary. uh, Gershon is, and he ended up just going by Geddy. I guess some of his cousins couldn't say Gary right, and so they started calling him Geddy. They were young, and it just stuck, and that's how he became Geddy Lee. Um, so the book talks about his early life, growing up in Toronto, how he met his future bandmate Alex. Uh, Try to not to butcher his last name, Zilyanovich, which he ended up changing that his name to Alex Lifeson, um, and that's what he went by. That's I guess that's kind of his stage name. But so he met Alex in junior high. They started playing together. It talks about how Geddy got his first bass guitar, shows that they played as teenagers, and uh, how Rush was formed. It went through a couple other names. They were both in other bands, and then they formed Rush, and then it details how their careers took off. After their first album, they added Neil Peart to their band, and then it became the world-renowned triumvirate that everybody knows today. It goes through the recordings of all their albums. So if you're a Rush fan, you will love this. Even if you're not a Rush fan, you will love this book. It's just very detailed, and he's got a great sense of humor. There's a lot of humor interspersed throughout. I highly recommend this book. I don't think you would be disappointed with this. Um, yeah, it's uh, it's definitely a book that you should read. The third biography on my list that you should read is The Secret Life of Houdini, The Making of America's First Superhero by William Kalush and Larry Sloman. Before I read this book, I had a picture of Houdini. I think I saw a movie when I was a kid about his life, um, but I definitely didn't know all the things that I found out by reading this book. Well, he was born in Budapest, Hungary, uh, emigrated to the United States when he was young. Um, then it talks about his youth growing up, how he got into being a magician, the promise that he made to his mother that he would always take care of her, which he did throughout her entire life. He was very close to his mother, and that's in the book. It really shows what life was like in the 1900s and the 1910s when Houdini was very popular. It walks you through uh, a lot of his tricks. The Chinese water torture cell was one of the ones that he used, where he was shackled by his hands and his feet, and he was suspended upside down in a water tank, and he had to escape. He had to pick the locks and escape before he drowned. That was a famous one that he had. Another one that was highly publicized. He would uh, be suspended above a city street by a crane or from a building high above the city street, and he would be in a straitjacket, hung upside down, and he would have to free himself from the straitjacket and get out of that predicament. Um, he was kind of the U.S.'s, I don't want to say first celebrity, but he was uh, super popular. I think it's probably hard for us to understand just how popular he was in that time period. He was in silent movies where he performed his own stunts. He was on a biplane and had to, he flew the biplane and he was on the wings of the biplane. Little trivia tidbit, he was the first person to fly an airplane in Australia, which I think is kind of bizarre. But I got that from the book. Uh, so it follows his life, his marriage. His brother became a famous magician also. His name was Hardin, kind of capitalizing on Houdini's name a little bit. And he had lots of imitators who, Houdini was constantly having to basically send cease and desist letters to all these imitators out there who would use derivatives of his name or compare themselves to him. They would steal the tricks that he was using. So he was constantly on guard against all of these imitators. And some other important things that were in the book. Houdini became a quote unquote spy for Allied forces. Um, he actually performed in Germany during World War One, and he would get access, I guess, by his celebrity. He would get access to uh, jail cells. He provided intel. Basically, he provided intel to Allied forces of the things that he saw in these enemy countries, and also he trained spies in escape methods. I thought that was really interesting that he did all that. I had no idea that he did things like that. And then towards the end of the book, it talks a lot about how Houdini fought against the spiritualist movement in the U.S. and in Britain. Well, it was big. I guess it was big all around the world. In fact, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a big proponent of the spiritualist movement, and he and Houdini were good friends at first, and then they became enemies, and would write letters to the press, kind of putting each other down. And Houdini thought that they were shysters, taking advantage of people who were grieving, who wanted to contact their loved ones beyond the grave, and this spiritualist movement, they were taking advantage of these people, and they were using tricks and schemes, and I mean, they were going all out to make it seem real. Think of a seance, and you know, somebody behind the curtain speaking in the dead person's voice, or things like that. They were doing things like that, and Houdini was against that. So a good part of the book is devoted to that. Also, it's a very interesting biography, and it's pretty thick. It's got 590 pages, and there are some photos. Uh, yeah, there's different photos of things in here. Um, I just found it a really good, informative biography, very entertaining. I highly recommend this if you haven't read it. If you have read it, let me know. Let me know what you thought of it. Yeah, so that's The Secret Life of Houdini by William Kalush and Larry Sloman. And the last biography, and these aren't ranked, these are just 4 biographies. But the last biography that we're going to talk about today is Darwin, The Life of a Tormented Evolutionist, by Adrian Desmond and James Moore. Charles Darwin, I'm sure you know, the father of the theory of evolution. I really enjoyed this book also, and it's a big book. It's pretty thick. It's over 800 pages, um, and there are lots of pictures in this too. But the book, it covers all of Charles Darwin's life. In fact, I'm going to read a brief snippet of a review I saw on Amazon. Hailed as the definitive biography, this monumental work explains the character and paradoxes of Charles Darwin and opens up the full panorama of Victorian science, theology, and mores. The author brings to life Darwin's reckless student days in Cambridge, his epic 5-year voyage on the Beagle, and his grueling struggle to develop his theory of evolution. That kind of sums the book up in a nutshell of everything that it covers. There's a large cast of characters in here, but I didn't have any problem keeping track of who they were and their importance to Charles Darwin's story. And some of the things I got from this book, not only did it explain, obviously, the theory of evolution and broke things down, it explained how Darwin kind of came to that conclusion, uh, drawing heavily from his travels on the HMS Beagle, uh, his trip to South America, where he witnessed firsthand what he said was evolution in progress, or the things that he found, what he saw on his trip. But I also learned a lot about his family life and about his wife and how supportive she was, how she looked after him. He was sick a lot in his life. He had an unknown illness. They had 10 children together. One of their daughters died at 10 of tuberculosis, and she was Charles Darwin's favorite, the apple of his eye, and he was forever changed by that death. And that's highlighted in the book. I got a very good picture of who the man was and a really good understanding of where science stood in that era. And I highly recommend the book. I can't recommend it enough. In fact, it's one of the best biographies that I've ever read. So if you haven't read this book, I highly suggest it. If you have read it, again, let me know. If you've read any of these 4 biographies, let me know what you thought. I'd love to hear from you. Give me a like. Please subscribe to the channel. I hope you're having a great summer. I know it's half over. I can't believe it. I think my next video, I'm going to talk about how my summer reading is going and some things that I would like to accomplish before the end of summer, books that I would like to read before the end of summer. So I will see you next time.